Afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Gemma Bolton. I'm on Labour's National Executive Committee, and I'm also co-chair of the campaign for Labour Party Democracy. I'm really pleased to welcome you to this second session of today's event, Building the Fight Back for Socialist Solutions, a special plenary. Today's conference as a whole is hosted by Labour Assembly, and this session is in partnership with both the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy and Momentum. And we're delighted to have so many different speakers and organisations join us for this second session today and to bring people together for such an important discussion with thousands of you tuning in online. So the disastrous Tory government is still failing to protect health and people. It's resorted to racist scapegoating to distract from their disastrous handling of the pandemic and the corruption crisis. It's planning further cuts and assaults in the months ahead as the cost of living crisis gets deeper and deeper. And the Tories have also resorted to attack after attack on our rights, from the Overseas Operations Bill to the Spy Cops Bill to the proposed police bill. And Labour needs to be taking the fight to the Tories on these issues, and the leadership should be focusing on defeating the Tories rather than these constant attacks on the left the last year. And despite the problems in organising post-campaigners on other popular causes, take a stand against the Tories' reactionary agenda. So this session then will look at how we must stand up with those resisting the agenda and further develop the social movements and campaigns that can build, that can link up and that can coordinate resistance, and also how this relates to our vital ongoing campaigning in the Labour Party itself for democracy, for socialist policies, and vitally taking the fight to the Tories. So please put your questions in the Q&A on the Zoom webinar or in the chat if you're watching on YouTube, and also let us know where you're tuning in from. Please also donate at the link provided so we can continue hosting all these important events and support the other campaigns and links are put in the chat throughout the event. So without further ado, let's move on to our first speaker. Diane was going to be joining us today, but she's going to be speaking at another event, which has left us a little bit extra time for our first speaker, who's a brilliant organiser, a wonderful comrade, and we also wouldn't be here today without him because he's the national organiser for Labour Assembly Against Austerity. So welcome, Matt Woolgrath.
Thank you, Gemma. And yes, Diane is coming, but she's now speaking in the international session at 4:30 and is currently at a refugee protest about refugee rights in London. I'd like to thank everyone for speaking and thank Gemma for all the work she does on the NEC and her chairing. I'd like to thank over the 3,000 people who registered for today's event in advance, and the over 50,000 people who registered for some kind of Labour Assembly or Rise online event during the on-off lockdown. I think we meet today at quite an important time when we discuss the fight back, which is what this session is about, and the socialist solutions. And I think the first thing that we need to do, as Gemma hints at, is look at the scale of what we are faced with. Yes, in the Labour Party, but I think it's also important for the Labour left to look at what we're faced with in society. And that is why the double title, Building the Fight Back Against This and for Socialist Solutions, are relevant and important. It's said a lot, but it's worth repeating that Boris Johnson's government has used the cover of the COVID crisis to launch a massive offensive on all fronts. And every week we see this, more and more attacks, from economic issues, cuts up just to universal credit, through to the scapegoating of migrants and the reactionary social agenda. There is no doubt that this government has only just started when it comes to the scale of the majority of people. This is also, I think, we need to understand, combined with a hard right foreign policy agenda, including starting a new nuclear arms race through AUKUS and not taking any action needed to tackle climate catastrophe. But yet, I don't think we've really seen anything yet from the Tories. We need to understand that the scale of attacks on working people, on BAME communities and others are going to get harder and bigger. As Tories are leading us to barbarism, just as some of their allies internationally, such as their chums Modi in India and Bolsonaro in Brazil, have done during this COVID pandemic. And whether it be the new Cold War, the federal threat on sick pay, or to back nurses having a decent pay rise, as Gemma said, the Labour front bench has failed to land killer blows on the Tories again and again. Such a prospect means that the left must rise to the challenges ahead ourselves, and a radical scale of response is needed, as John outlined in his lecture. I'm sure other speakers will do in the rest of the session. That means we need to be organising resistance to Johnson's agenda right now and give all we can in full solidarity with those communities, trade unions and popular causes making a stand against that agenda. Alongside this, there must be no room for us adopting or adapting to the politics of scapegoating migrants and refugees to the problems caused by this disastrous government. Anti-racism and black liberation must be central to our politics, not an occasional add-on. Same should be said of our anti-war internationalism and solidarity for global justice, as will be further later today. Ruling class organisers globally, and we must too. As well as seeking to support, reach out and organise with new allies in our communities and indeed around the world, we must also continue to fight for party democracy and socialist policies in Labour, as so many of you here are doing in your constituencies up and down the country. It's false to argue that this work in the Labour Party and building movements in our workplaces, communities and the streets are counterposed or contradictory. As Tony Benn argued again and again, both are essential and supplement each other. That's why it's so great to have a wide range of speakers in this session, including people from left groups in Labour, but also people from trade unions, the People's Assembly and other movements such as that. And we must work together in the Labour Party on the left and beyond it. We're delighted to have so many different groups with us throughout the year, and that unity needs to be built on. My final point, very quickly, is that we remain a major force on the left in British politics at the present time, but we can't take this for granted. Those who want to dampen resistance to the reactionary agenda are always seeking to divide, demoralise and defeat us. So unity and action between us is therefore more essential than ever. Thank you all.
Thanks, Matt. Our next speaker is Mark Serwotka from PCS. He's PCS General Secretary, and the PCS is a fighting union, an example for us all. It's been fighting against cuts and for workers' rights and conditions and taking on the Tories' reactionary agenda head on. Welcome, Mark. I think we've lost Mark for a minute. I think he was having some internet connectivity issues earlier. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker and bring Mark back in when he's managed to sort out those issues. So our next speaker is Helen O'Connor of the People's Assembly. She's a trade unionist with the GMB and a brilliant campaigner against Boris Johnson, including for our NHS and against privatisation. So welcome, Helen.
Thank you very much, Gemma, and thank you to the Labour Assembly Against Austerity for inviting me to speak today on behalf of the People's Assembly. And I want to start by sending solidarity greetings to the RMT union strikers and the UCU strikers and to all workers in struggle. And just a message to those who need it, there is no such thing as an unnecessary strike. And for those in our movement who don't understand this, we will always support workers in struggle. I've been an industrial organiser for the GMB union for the past 4 years, and I was an NHS nurse for 28 years. So please allow me to start and outline what's happening in the NHS at the moment, where I organise outsourced workers as well as nurses and clinical staff. Many are working more than one job, sometimes 3. They're working over 60 hours a week. They struggle to meet housing costs and struggle to even put food on the table. Many are forced to access food banks, and I mean forced because this is not a choice. Some of the private companies taking over in our hospitals have not even bothered to give their workers a pay rise since before COVID struck. They can't even be bothered to pay for work that's done on time. Many don't even have the basic entitlement to sick pay. And imagine this, sick workers having to drag themselves into hospitals because if they don't, their kids won't be able to eat. And if that's not exploitation, then I don't know what is. The casualisation of work, wage theft and exploitation is on the rise across the country and in every type of employment, whether it's public sector or private. No one will escape the deliberate impact of the drive to hollow out our NHS and our public services. People are queuing in ambulances and dying outside hospitals. Any of us can lose a job and become dependent on universal credit, and the system is on its knees, marginalising the unemployed and disabled people, and child poverty is on a huge rise. Charity is being sold as a viable and a moral alternative to the welfare state, and badly built, rodent-infested slum housing is on the rise across this country. And even in my area where I live, I can't walk 20 yards without coming across a homeless person. And now inflation is up by 4.9% and rising fast. This will have a catastrophic impact on living standards, especially for those who are now called the working poor. And if interest rates are hiked up by the Bank of England, many people who currently think themselves economically safe will end up on the breadline, and many more will lose their homes. Since the 80s, there's been a political consensus consensus in this country amongst all of the major parties that there's no alternative to cuts and privatisation. We did get a brief respite from this under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership with the last manifesto, which posed an alternative to the endless cycle of cuts and privatisation, and it prioritised the defence of our public services. It's a lie that only the private sector can deliver public services, that providing public services is too expensive, and that the private sector is better than the public sector. There is also a lie that if workers get decent wages, it will destabilise the economy. Wages have been deliberately driven down to poverty levels for decades, but the economy is still failing, and most particularly, it's going to fail the next generation. The trade union movement must take a lead in calling all of this out. No cuts, no privatisation must mean precisely this. Proper funding and proper staffing levels to deliver our public services must be at the core of our demands. We must demand what we need and deserve, and not settle for what the Tories think they can get away with. And if we do not stop the ongoing sell-off of the NHS, which is in part being defunded through chronic underfunding for further privatisation, if we don't stop the slicing off of one service after another, then I'm making this point to you, and it has to be heard. We will not have a functioning NHS in 10 years' time, and all trade unions must get behind the struggle to defend the NHS under the banner of the TUC. And let's be clear, it doesn't mean we set all of the other priorities aside. Of course we don't. On the contrary, though, a united campaign to defend the NHS would be the greatest possible basis to defend all public services and to defend the terms and conditions of all workers, whether in the private or the public sector. And all these are part of the same struggle, and the attacks on our class stem from the same source. This is why we must act collectively, rather than allowing our class enemies to pick us all off one by one. And any politician who is not prepared to fully, loudly, consistently and unflinchingly oppose cuts and privatisation is no friend of the working class or the trade union movement. The capitalist system is now entering a period of deep instability and crisis, and the crisis builds around us. There is a pressing necessity to concentrate on the issues that affect working class people. Legitimate debate and disagreement is and should always be part of our movement, but we must stop creating phony divisions and fault lines and work to maximise unity. The bridge to unity, rather than the chasm of division, is class. This is what unites us. Our demands must focus on the real priorities of working class people: pay, terms, conditions, defence of public services, building genuine equality and not just ticking boxes. We must fight racism and the warmongering imperialism, the consequences of which saw 27 human beings dying in the English Channel a few days ago. And as we prepare to face the battles of the coming year, the People's Assembly will be organising to take a message of resistance to every town and every city in the country. And comrades, let's do some real organising. Social media is a great tool, but it cannot substitute for organising people in communities, in hospitals, in care homes, and in factories. And we have to build real solidarity and create structures that can pull people into our movement. And we need to be listening to the voices of those who are either unorganized or think there is no alternative to what they face on a daily basis. Working class people aren't disinterested in politics. They understand that decisions made by politicians affect them. So we don't argue for a rejection of politics, but to build a genuine alternative, a socialist alternative. And it's our job to draw as many people into the movement as possible, and not least of all women workers. No section of society has borne the burden of cuts, privatisation and austerity more than women. 9 out of 10 times, it is women who will shoulder the burden of all of the additional caring responsibilities that flow from the destruction of our public services. And the majority of women have to get out to work, some of them in grueling jobs, and these women are cut out of promotion opportunities. They're denied decent pensions, and this is directly linked to our reproductive role in society. And women with young children to care for are still denied flexible working. Just yesterday, I came across the case of a young woman with twins who's being denied flexible working and is now facing dismissal from her job. And this woman doesn't work for an outsourced company. She actually works within the NHS. And in a period where a woman is killed every 4 days by a man in this country, services specific to women, like domestic domestic abuse refuges, for example, are being closed through defunding. So this is a life and death issue for women. So women must be at the forefront of the resistance we're building. And if we achieve this, women's concerns must be seriously addressed across the left and in our movement. And we must do this because the Tory party is no refuge for working class women. The People's Assembly believes we can build a movement capable of defeating the Tories. We believe as we go into the coming year, we must organise as never before. So let's organise to fight back and win. Solidarity.
Solidarity, Helen, and thank you. I think that was brilliant and very inspiring. Our next speaker, I work very closely with this comrade on the National Executive Committee, and he's also a member of Momentum's NCG. He's a wonderful fighter. He's just great to work with. So please welcome Mish Rahman.
Thank you, Comrade Gemma, and thank you to Labour Assembly for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on this platform with great class fighters. Comrades, yesterday Tony Blair re-emerged from his villainous lair to declare more war against socialism and called for Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer to reject wokeism. The reason Tony Blair's intervention was telling was because as we lead the fight back against the Tories, Tony Blair has nothing to offer this argument. In fact, if you look at his interventions, they're seldom critical of Tories or even offering solutions against the Tories. It's always attack the left, reject wokeism, reject the left, stop socialism, move to the centre, teach Corbyn a lesson, kick socialists, blah, 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 bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. He's got nothing to say about the social care crisis and the Tories' failure to deal with it. Nothing to say about the climate crisis and the Tories' failure to take advantage of the leadership of COP26 and the targets. He's got nothing to say on the rising inequality, nothing to say on the housing crisis, nothing to say on wages stagnating, nothing to say on fire and rehire, nothing to say on workers getting shafted, solidarity with RMT and with UCU and anyone else on strike today, nothing to say over the refugee crosses over the channel, nothing. And there is the problem. The economy is not working for a vast amount of the population of this country and hasn't worked for a long time under a succession of governments. And we all know we need an economy that works for the many and not the few. And these centrists, they don't have the solutions. Meanwhile, we've got a racist, classist, oppressive, ideologue government who's banning protests, crushing any opposition with bills such as the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, the Spy Cops Bill, and now the Nationality and Borders Bill. I mean, this Nationality and Borders Bill would give the government the power to strip people like me of my British citizenship without any notice, without any warning, and without any right to appeal, despite me being born here in the West Midlands, grown up here, and living here all my life, and my parents being British citizens at the time of my birth, but they were immigrants and they had brown-coloured skin. I could be deported to Bangladesh, that's where they came from, a country that I'm not a citizen of. And that's just because my parents weren't born here. I'm not really British, apparently, according to Priti Patel. And it would make me a kind of second-class citizen. And if this isn't racism, then I don't know what is. And that rule can affect every black, brown, and person of colour living in Britain if it's passed. Last week, I created a video for Momentum on social media called Am I British? And it highlighted this racist Tory Nationality and Borders Bill. I mean, I was overwhelmed by the response that the video received. It had something like 500,000 views on TikTok and more than 1 million on all social media platforms in total, not including the thousands and thousands of times it was shared organically on WhatsApp and chat groups. And Momentum shares a lot of videos and social medias. It's how we get our message across on all kinds of issues. And it's thanks to socialists and members and supporters that we're able to do this. They care, they want to make a difference, and that's what we're trying to do, make a difference. But Momentum also supports our campaigns and communities by helping and doing the vital work of movement building. And that's what we need to do. We need to skill up activists across the country and scale up our political education amongst our membership and into wider society. As socialists, we are the final line. But comrades, there's something else that's weighing heavily on my heart. And that's what happened in the English Channel this week. 27 people died while trying to reach the UK mainland with the hope of a better life. They drowned 17 men, 7 women, one of whom was pregnant, and 3 children. The deadliest crossing on record. 27 people That's what we know about so far. I can't stop thinking about how these people died, desperate people trying to find a better life, drowning in the freezing waters of the English Channel. I mean, just imagine if your dinghy collapses, you end up in cold water. It's shocking, it's tragic, it's disgraceful, it's outrageous, and above all, it's completely avoidable. I mean, what happened in the Channel this week is all of those things. And safe and legal passage to asylum is a fundamental human right. Now imagine if it's me or you or our brother or our daughter or our sister in that position, one of the dead was a pregnant woman. Stop and think, consider the response of this government. Priti Patel says she is shocked but not surprised. Labour's leadership criticised Priti Patel for not being tough enough. We're led by a human rights lawyer and one of the best in the country at that. What chance does humanity have? Priti Patel was shocked but not surprised. Upon those responses, so were we, shocked but not surprised, unfeeling, lacking in basic humanity. It's monstrous for them. The world is like the Matrix. All they see is everything in money, in shares, political calculation, callous manipulation, base views for personal, political gain. They don't see people. They don't see the 27 people who drowned in the freezing waters of the English Channel. It's all about money, capitalism, defending the status quo, keeping the establishment happy, spending money to protect the system, further their political aims. Millions of refugees around the world are fleeing their homelands as a result of their wars, illegal wars that we, the West, waged in the name of making the world a better place. We spent 20 billion in Iraq, 25 billion in Afghanistan, billions more on Libya, billions in Syria. And what have we created? A world where a woman who's so desperate for a better life comes over here pregnant and ends up drowning. These people, all they've created is desperate communities and destroyed the infrastructure of entire nations. And the first person named that was drowned today, 24 years old, Mariam Nouri Muhammad Amin. She was a refugee escaping 2 decades of a war led by the West in Iraq. We can't let this go. We can't return to reactionary talk about controlling and managing immigration. We want no return to that dangerous populist mindset that leads us back in that vicious circle, back to illegal wars, more chaos, more destruction, and it's all for money, and it's all for investment, and it's all for resources. There's always money for war. There's always money to bail out a troublesome boss or an oil company or a bank. It's the capitalist way. I'm calling for a regime change of my own, a political and social regime change where we sweep away this callous failing system and replace it with one built on mutual solidarity, care, trust, and love. And that's why we fight for socialism and we'll continue to fight for it. Labour isn't pro-business, it's pro-society. And I'm going to end with this quote from the great late Fred Hampton, the young 21-year-old leader of the Black Panther movement, who said, "We don't think you fight fire with fire best. We think you fight fire with water best." We're going to fight racism, not with racism. We're going to fight with solidarity. And that's why we won't forget those 27 people who drowned in the English Channel this week. People who only wanted a shot at a better life and a decent future. Comrades, we owe it to them to keep fighting for their future and for the future of everybody in this country who's finding it hard. And we need to build it in our lifetime. And we're going to fight back with solidarity. Thank you, comrades.
Thanks, Mish. I completely agree. Labour has to be a signpost and not a weather vane. And we have to stand up to these reactionary and racist attacks. Next, we have Sam Browse from Labour Assembly, who's going to speak for a few minutes on supporting Labour Assembly. Sam, are you here?
I'm here. Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Sam. I'm an activist with Labour Assembly Against Austerity. Just here to talk about a couple of things. Firstly, the most important thing, it costs money to put on these events. We run by volunteers almost exclusively, and it's an awful lot of work and hard graft that people put in. So please, can I encourage you, just hit the donate button. Someone should be posting a link in the chat about how to donate to the cause. Like I say, costs money to put on these Zoom webinars, so please help us in that kind of way. The second thing to say too is please follow us on social media. The Labour Assembly Against Austerity is on Facebook, it's on Twitter, so give us a follow. And also to say as well, follow our partners, Arise Festival, who are helping us out today in terms of running the event. You can find them on Twitter and Facebook too, and also on YouTube as well. Quick fact for you, lots of people in the questions I've seen have been asking if the transcriptions will be available from speakers after today. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube later, so definitely like follow us on YouTube, because that's how you can follow up on the things that you've seen in live today. Finally, I'd say take a look at our media partner, Outlook as well. Labour Outlook is a news and views website of the Labour left. Keeps you up to date on all the latest things that are going on in the struggle, and all the best ideas that are coming out of the left as well. So check that out. And quite a few people on the panel today write for us pretty regularly too. So it's definitely worth reading and subscribing to. Again, you can follow us on Twitter and on Facebook as well. So check out all of that. And finally, just to repeat one more time, please hit the donate button. We, like I say, we operate solely on the basis of donations. The only way we can do this is by people helping us out. The bosses, they've got big businesses, they've got loads of cash on their side. All we've got is each other. So yeah, please do hit that donate button. And I'll see you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and see you at future events too. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sam. And I'm sure everyone would join me in thanking Labour Assembly Against Austerity, Rise, Labour Outlook for all the work they do in getting the message out for socialism, for democracy, for left-wing policies. Our next speaker is Mark Serwotka, who I did introduce before, but he's General Secretary of PCS, which is a wonderful fighting union. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks very much, and apologies if I think my connection was lost earlier. There's a very, very strong gale in Wales at the moment, and the internet connection keeps going down, but hopefully you can hear me now. Can I thank the organisers of the meeting and for all the work that people are doing all the year round, and for everyone who's joined us on the call. Also, can I say how fantastic I thought both the previous speakers were. And I particularly want to say how much I welcome Helen O'Connor's contribution, that is really centering on things that I think often we don't say enough. One is the importance of collectivism and about building in workplaces and communities. However important social media is, and clearly if it wasn't for the internet, we wouldn't be having this online meeting today, it does not replace the discussions and collectivism that need to be rooted in our workplaces and in our communities in order to fight back. And can I also very much welcome the way that Helen centered the oppression that women continually face, disproportionately affected by austerity, and far too often, I think, attacked for having the temerity to stand up for their rights. And I was very much hoping to share the platform with Diane today. I know she's speaking later, but I just want to say that I think Diane Abbott is one of the most influential figures in our movement, and has been over many, many decades. Not only a fabulous socialist, but a committed woman, and a Black woman who has offered so much to our movement. And in a time where we often talk about abuse, we all know that Diane faces more abuse than virtually anyone else in this country. And I want to give full solidarity to her, also to other socialist women MPs like Zara Sultana, who are currently being witch hunted potentially and are being attacked. And our movement has to stand with these women and ensure that in order to get the fight back that we need against the Tories, we very much, I think, support and welcome and need to see a vibrant working class women's movement in order to ensure that we reach out throughout all parts of this country for the fight back that we need. Now, what I wanted to focus on is mainly a contribution from a trade union angle, but I think it is important to start with the events that we've seen in the channel this week that's already been referred to by our speakers. And it throws up, I think, not only the inhumanity of this government that we have, but also the type of resistance we need in order to ensure that we can build a genuine movement that welcomes refugees and asylum seekers and migrants to this country, and very quickly gets on the front foot to do more than just utter words about how obscene this situation is. And therefore I have to think that we have to sort of reflect. The current leadership of the Labour Party is appalling. The very fact that we have a government in this country that can preside over such a dreadful state of affairs that sees people not just drown in the Channel, but people needlessly die because of COVID, that sees us have poverty in our communities and get away with it, is in large parts because we do not have an effective or adequate opposition. And I think, therefore, for all of us as socialists who want to try and resist the government, it is in our interest not only to ensure that left-wing policies and more left-wing people are seen and heard in the Labour leadership, but it is to also recognise that we are one of those moments in history where actually waiting for the Labour Party to sort itself out is not an answer to the problems we face today, tomorrow, next week and next month. Those problems have to be faced up to by real opposition, mobilising people, by seeing more strikes and demonstrations and civil resistance to stop the carnage that we are seeing each and every day. And I want to therefore say that my union is making an important announcement today, because our union represents the workers in the border force. And you know, often PCS members who work for government, whether they are in job centres or in the Home Office, often face a lot of criticism. Some of that sometimes comes from the left, and sometimes people even argue that some of the work that is done should not even be trade unionised. Well, I'm going to make an announcement today on behalf of my union, I think, that knocks that argument well and truly into touch. Today, PCS, on behalf of our members in the border force, by the way, members who are currently out on boats in the Channel and are helping to rescue people when they fall into the sea, are not people who support what Priti Patel is doing. In fact, they have asked their union, and we can today announce a groundbreaking legal challenge against Priti Patel and the government, taken jointly with 4 refugee organisations, including Care for Calais, that we believe will show that the government's actions are unlawful and illegal. And in the words of Care for Calais today, it's a groundbreaking moment because this legal action represents uniting those organisations fighting for the victims of the government inhuman policy with those organisations who represent the workers, in this case in the civil service, who are told to do things that they know to be unacceptable. That legal challenge has been launched. It has now been joined by our union, and we have today announced to the press that not only are we taking legal action to stop the government in its tracks, but we are also making it clear that we will support any calls for industrial action of any sort to come from our members in the border force, including those who are prepared to refuse any instructions that tell them they should turn boats back in the Channel against international law and frankly against all instincts of humanity. And I think that's a very good example of how socialists, trade unions, campaigning organisations can make common cause to fight not just for the interests of the workers in the industries that we all come from, but also on behalf of those people who are on the receiving end of such appalling government policy. And that's why when we talk about socialist solutions for the fight back, I think in the trade union movement, we need to centre offensive demands that not only seek to stop the government from what it's doing, but to inspire not just trade unionists, but those people who are yet to join trade unions and those people who can't join because they may be unemployed or retired, to argue for a very type of post-pandemic society than the one this government is offering us. And that means going on the front foot. And it means saying that our socialist solutions need to be fighting for a 4-day week. They need to be fighting for a reduced retirement age, not one of the highest in Europe, but one that reduces its retirement age. We need to argue for a £15 an hour minimum wage, the end of privatisation for our public services, the scrapping of our anti-union laws, but we also need to argue for permanent, full-time skilled jobs in all communities in the UK, not just in the cities, whether they be north or south, but in all of those towns and villages where so many people are currently forced to uproot and move because they cannot get jobs. As Helen says, we need to fight for a fully funded public sector NHS, and we also need to centre in our struggle the need for a benefit system in the way it was envisaged when set up after the war by the Labour government, and not one that can see people driven into poverty and destitution by cutting universal credit. Those are socialist demands that the trade unions need to have centre stage, and they need to make common cause to fight for with all of those people, whether they are pensioners, people on benefits, users of the NHS, or whether they are migrants coming to this country who we should welcome and help have a better life. And comrades, that means supporting unions when they go into struggle. So let me say how appalling it is. The Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has used social media to attack RMT people on strike, fighting for health and safety on the London Underground. We do not elect Labour politicians to criticise unions and workers when they fight to defend themselves. So I hope everyone will join me in giving full solidarity, not just to those brave strikers in the RMT, but also those magnificent strikers in the university and college union fighting for pay and pensions and better terms and conditions, and indeed the strikers in my own union, whether they be those in the private sector in Royal Parks fighting and winning against a private sector employer, those members like ours in the Driving Standards Agency who defeated the government's attempt to force them to work in unsafe conditions, or indeed those like our members at the DVLA who after 6 months on strike fighting for a safe working environment fell foul of the Tory anti-union laws when forced to reballot, and with 80% of people voting for a strike did not manage to breach the undemocratic anti-union threshold. These struggles show us the way of men and women fighting back in the workplace against injustice, for health and safety, for decent pay and conditions, and they all deserve our support. But comrades, I want to finish with this. Rallies like this are essential, but rallies like this will never fulfill their full potential if we all just say what it is that we need without spelling out the problems we have to overcome if we are going to turn the tide and defeat the government and get a better tomorrow for all of the people that we care about. And that means having an honest dialogue. It means recognising that in the Labour Party at the moment, the left is on the back foot and we have frontbench politicians who do not speak for working class people in the communities that we care about. It means in our trade union movement, despite some signs of a renaissance and some unions like the UCU, RMT, Unite and PCS fighting back, we still have too many unions who are not prepared to support their members in struggle. I call today for the joining of all public sector trade unions in a joint fight over pay and pensions to deal with this cost of living crisis, to recreate the spirit of 2010-11, when 2 million of us went on strike in 29 different unions to fight against pension cuts. We could do it then, we can do it now, and it is what we need to coordinate the fight back to stop rogue employers in both the public and private sector. But comrades, I also want to finish with this. It also means recognizing that as a left, in many ways, we are not in great shape. The advent of social media has many, many qualities, but it also means far too many people, routinely not accountable to anyone, can throw abuse out at other comrades without collective discussion. That is the way socialists have always overcome differences of tactics and differences of principle. We come together, we discuss, we make common cause, and we unite against the enemy. We need to rediscover that spirit. We need to remember that if the left is not united and seeks to unite all of our people, the Tories will defeat us. And that means not wishing for things to be how we wish them to be. They are recognizing where we are and working to make them better. So I put this call out in finishing, and it's very much to support what Helen said. We need to work towards not just coordinated and mass industrial action, but we need to work towards the biggest mobilization we've seen in this country early next year to unite all those people, whether they're fighting against climate change, fighting for a decent benefit system, for migrants to be brought into this country, fighting discrimination, or whether they're fighting for a decent cost of living. But to do that, we need to now do the work in a non-sectarian, all-embracing way rooted in our communities. Going back to meetings in our social clubs, in our workplaces, linking trade union branches with community campaigning organizations, because the work we do now in those workplaces and in those communities, the work we do now to unite all of our struggles, is the work that will see its full fruit early next year, hopefully, not just with a massive mobilization, but with the type of industrial response from the trade unions that can truly defeat this government. Comrades, I believe if we do that, not only will we see a better tomorrow, a better next month, and a better next year, but we will also help revitalize those people in politics disillusioned with the role currently taken by the current Labour leadership to get the left on the front foot in the Labour Party, but equally, if not more importantly, on the front foot across all of our communities. Solidarity Conference, Let's support the people struggling now, support the legal challenge against this government, and let's fight for a better world, and let's do it in unity. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Mark. That was incredible, and solidarity and good luck with your legal challenge and your struggles going forwards. And we're all behind you, comrades, all of you in PCS and all the other, the many trade unions that are currently striking and going through struggle at the moment. Just to remind everybody, I can see loads of participants. Please do send in your questions if you have them for our panelists. Put them in the Q&A chat if you're watching on Zoom. We can put them in the comment chat if you're watching on YouTube. Please send them in. We should have a bit of time at the end, and it would be great to hear what priorities people think are coming out of today's conference. So our final speaker for today needs a little introduction. It's Richard Burgon MP. He's the secretary of the Socialist campaign group of MPs, and he's going to be speaking on a wealth tax. So 40 MPs from 6 different parties have backed his motion on this so far, and he has an amendment to the finance bill coming this week. So please tell us all about it. Richard, welcome.
Thanks very much, Gemma, and thanks to all the panelists and to every single person who signed in for this important event today. I was at an event in person last night at Lancaster University Labour Club, so getting back onto Zoom feels like going back in time in a way, but it's important that these Zoom meetings continue. So well done to Arise and well done to the Labour Assembly Against Austerity for all that you do to bring people from our movement together to discuss and debate and organise for the way forward. I want to start off my remarks really just by reflecting, as Mish and other speakers did, about the awful loss of life in the Channel. And we all need to be clear that this is the result of a lack of safe passage. This goes hand in hand with the hostile environment and the demonisation of migrants. It was only the other week in Parliament that I was there watching the sickening sight of Tory MPs competing with each other to stick the boot into migrants. So we need to not just ensure that our party doesn't join in the scapegoating of migrants. We need to be a powerful voice and a powerful movement against the scapegoating of migrants, which will only increase as the multiple crises our society face take hold. I think it's important to reflect what it shows about the morality of the leadership of this country, but also the morality of the system under which we live. Tony Benn famously said that the way a government treats refugees is very instructive because it shows you how they would treat the rest of us if they thought they could get away with it. And that's true. It's like that some people's lives don't matter. As a movement, we believe that everyone's lives matter. So I also want to just, before I open my remarks on the wealth tax and other economic issues, give a message of solidarity to the RMT trade union and to their members on strike in London. It's not too much to ask for elected Labour officials to support trade unions and support trade unionism. People often talk in politics about tough choices, but it seems to me that many take the easy choice, siding with the bosses, not siding with workers in struggle. So in relation to the need for Labour to seize the agenda and fight for a national care service funded by a wealth tax, I think we need to reflect upon the debate. The debate on how to fund much needed social care investment has forced the issue of taxation to the top of the political agenda. With the excuse of funding social care, we've had the Tory tax hikes on working people, the national insurance contributions, and now we've got the working class dementia tax announced this week, whereby working class people will lose their homes to fund social care, but where millionaires will get to keep their mansions. Now, this is a case study of simple class warfare, hitting millions of working people in the pocket and letting the wealthy off the hook. And at the end of it all, people still don't get the services that they need, while private care companies continue to profit. All of this is part of a relentless Tory attempt to make working people pay for the COVID crisis, with millions hit by universal credit cuts of over £1,000 a year, alongside the tightest squeeze on wages since the age of Napoleon, and an ongoing refusal to rebuild our public services after the destruction of the last decade. And at the same time, as the Chancellor slashing the taxes that bankers have to pay on their profits, saving them billions of pounds over the next few years. So we do need, as a movement, to show that there is an alternative. And I'm pleased to see my party's front bench attacking the Tories this week over the failings on social care. But opposing reactionary Tory policies isn't enough. Our party also has to map out its own alternative. Unless Labour offers its own solutions, then, however unpopular certain Tory policies are, we can't expect the public to see us as the alternative. Timidity at this time risks many more years of Tory rule, and it's completely unnecessary. From a Green New Deal to reversing NHS privatisation, to building 100,000 new council houses a year, to scrapping student fees, we've developed progressive policies in recent years that have strong public backing. Continuing such progressive policies was the basis of the policy platform on which Keir won his leadership election. But sadly, that policy platform is not being pursued. It should be pursued if our party is to seize this moment to spell out a better alternative. One bold alternative that we should be fighting for is a national care service funded by a wealth tax. Imagine the impact on the polls if we had Labour activists across the country knocking on millions of doors in our communities with a simple and bold message. Labour is going to build a national care service funded through taxes on the super rich. Huge work has been done in recent years on Labour's vision for a national care service. It will be based on the principles of our NHS, free at the point of use, provided by the public sector and paid for through progressive taxation. It would include free personal care, support local authorities to directly provide care rather than outsource it, and it would include proper pay for the workforce. This is a vision that we can be confident would resonate with the public. A wealth tax is also an idea whose time has clearly come. British billionaires increased their wealth by £106 billion during the crisis, according to the Sunday Times Rich List. That's a sickening £290 million per day during this crisis. British billionaires will be £10 million richer at the end of this session than they were at the beginning. At the end of this session, at the end of our online session today, it's absolutely outrageous. Now, there are many ways that a wealth tax could work. One form could be a one-off 10% tax on the wealth of those with over £100 million. This would raise £69 billion. That could be a massive down payment on bringing services up to the levels needed to really deal with COVID consequences. Now, I know this is popular, this is because when I tweeted about it recently, it even got mention on Loose Women that had a special section on wealth taxes. So it's good to see socialist policies being mainstreamed in that way. Another form is an amendment I put down in September for an annual wealth tax of 1.5% on the wealthiest 1% of people. That's those with assets of over £5 million. That would raise £14 billion per year, according to the UK Wealth Tax Commission. So more than the government is raising through its regressive national insurance hikes. And another form of wealth tax is being pushed by the TUC, who say that capital gains tax, that's taxes paid on profits when selling assets like second homes or shares, should be increased to the same level as income tax. And along with getting rid of exemptions, that could raise to £17 billion a year for social care. That builds on an idea in our 2019 manifesto. And this week, I've put down, as Gemma said, an amendment to the finance bill that would mean that incomes from share dividends, the annual payments people get from companies that they own shares in, are taxed at the same rate as income tax. Again, that was in our last manifesto, and it was estimated then that it could raise up to £9 billion. Now, on the left, I don't think that we need to be falling out with each other, not at this stage anyway, over what type of wealth taxes we go for. This one or that one, some or all. No, what we have to do as a movement is to raise the banner and win the principle of a wealth tax. And we need to be getting the public to question the current rigged system. Why should income be taxed more than wealth? Why should those who live off the money from their annual share dividends pay less tax than those who go out to work day in, day out? Why is the tax on the money gained from those selling second homes paid at lower taxes than money earned from going out to work? By doing this, we can show that the Tories are so in the pockets of the super rich that they're refusing to tax wealth and instead are targeting working people. If Labour is to expose the Tory rhetoric about levelling up and boost our standing in the polls, then the leadership needs to be much clearer about what the party stands for. And I say that a wealth tax is the perfect way of showing the public whose side we are on.
Thank you so much, Richard, and we all support your amendment for wealth tax, and thank you for explaining it so well. We have some questions. I think it's best given time. I'm going to read some out. Some of them are aimed at our speakers, and some of them are for anybody on the panel. So I'll read them out, and then if I could ask our panelists to address any questions that have been asked of them, any of the general ones that they want to respond to, and then give some closing remarks before we finish up. So if you bear with me while I read some of the questions. So we had one from Terence on Zoom, who asked, the major challenge for me is, how do we act over and above what Labour says? I recognise that the time is not right for another party, but how do we meet, argue, organise and campaign with people outside the party who aren't happy with it? A similar question from Lisa on Zoom is, why do we stick by a banner of a party when it's clearly holding us back? And we have less than 10 years to prepare for the worst effects of climate change, rather than give our full support to the cause of saving the planet and civilization. Are the latter not more important than any party? And then there was a question for all on Zoom. Jeremy Corbyn faced a lot of backlash from media from his left-wing ideas. How will this movement minimise the influence of right-wing media on future elections? And then a question for Helen from Facebook. Where is the NHS and care bill now at, and what are our next campaigning steps? And then a question for Mish. Where are things regarding Labour's BAME structures, and what can we do to support self-organisation? A question for Mark. What would be the one policy or announcement Labour could back to help trade unions reorganise and grow? Another one for Mark. Excellent news about the legal action. Where is there a link we can donate to? And a question for Richard. Say, a lot of members are demoralised to see Labour leaders refuse to back industrial action. How many MPs do you think do back our workers in struggle? And then a question for everyone from a Labour councillor asking who asks how they can help. They ask how they can help promote socialist policies whilst being in opposition. And then finally, a question for all. If you could sum up why people should be a socialist in one sentence, what would it be? So if you sum up for me, I think that question sums things up really well. Just a few minutes, and then we'll draw the really great event today to a close. We'll start off with Matt.
Hello. Am I on? Yeah, yes. I couldn't see myself. That was weird. Very quickly, on this question about the party, whether we should be acting in the Labour Party or not. I've always been in the Labour Party since the late 90s, but I haven't always been. It hasn't always been my main field of activity. And I think that's very important. I don't think we should abandon that terrain of the struggle, just as I don't think we should abandon struggles in right-wing trade unions that need transforming. But I totally agree with what Mark S was saying on his speech. I thought that was a really important, strategic and inspirational contribution. And I think there are seeds of things in some of the unions that we can really take hope from, where you've got sort of leaderships coming through, but with a genuine base as well, that want to fight for jobs, that want to fight for our public services, and want to fight, like Mark's union has been doing for years, so often, sadly, on its own, or not on its own, but not through the whole movement. And that's what I think that's very important. And I also think, like, sorry, people should just do what you feel makes the difference, and you collectively discuss in your area, whether that be geographically or your workplace or whatever. There's no one solution, but what there is a lot of anger and resistance that we need to channel and unite together. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. And Helen?
Yeah, so just coming to the question about the NHS and social care, the Health and Social Care Bill, rather, it's on its third reading, so it's very close to becoming law. And what it will do is it will ramp up privatisation in the NHS to a crazy degree, and it will allow monopolies to move in and take over services. So what's being done about it? We're going to have to broaden our range of tactics, basically, to deal with cuts and privatisation in the NHS. And by that, I mean we're going to have to everyone's going to have to support protests and strike action, some of which has traditionally been frowned upon within the NHS, and it can be very, very difficult sometimes, but we're going to have to ramp up our tactics and keep organising and just keep fighting against all the cuts and privatisation. I know my own union, GMB, there's been lots of successful struggles. We've stopped outsourcing, we've stopped to private companies before. We're currently running a national strike ballot on pay for NHS staff, because that's a key tactic as well. Driving up the pay will make taking over services unaffordable for private companies. So we've opened our strike ballot. We're asking everybody to vote, and it closes on the 15th of December. And we're really hoping to get over the line on that and start really going into struggle in the new year. In terms of the other questions about the Labour Party particularly, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the Tories have a huge majority now in Parliament, so the parliamentary work is very, very difficult. But Richard himself on the call and all the other left-wing Labour MPs are doing such important work. Dawn Butler, I want to give her a mention basically for trying to protect the nurse title role. She tried to put in an amendment to the Health and Social Care Bill. So all of that work, it's so important that we support our good MPs in that. And working people have a right to have political representation. We have to struggle in all spheres, industrial, political, social, but we have a right to that political representation. We must never ever forget that. So personally, I think we need to keep fighting within the Labour Party, whilst also finding other routes to struggle, which people are doing anyway. They're doing it through the unions, they're doing it through the social movements, and we need to organise much more deeply and much more widely. There's much work to be done there, and I think that of itself will put its own pressure onto the politicians and the Tories, which is what we want to achieve. In terms of socialism, in one word or in one sentence, I'd say that socialism means the protection of the people and the planet, and it's a society that works for everybody, however you're born, wherever you're from. That would be my summing up of socialism. So thanks very much.
Helen. I'll move on to Mish next.
Yeah, just to my question, Gemma, about the BAME structures in the party. So the Labour BAME structures have been passed at conference. Obviously, we passed them on the NEC, and they'll be passed at conference. And these structures will be available to members to organise in the new year. There'll be a new Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic community committee, national committee, and there are also the elections for the BAME NEC rep as well will open. But the question about self-organising and how we support self-organising, obviously we have to champion self-organising, because these are spaces that are developing and weren't available to us in the past. And it's important now that there still are gatekeepers and gatekeeping to self-organising, because obviously the status quo and the establishment and the bureaucracy don't want people to organise. They're afraid of people organising. But the main thing has to be that we've got to come back in the same space as socialists once we organise back. because then we can only deliver as one. So that's really important. There's a question about being in opposition and how to promote socialist policies. I mean, community wealth building and installing our values in our communities, just like the likes of Preston, Salford, and North Ayrshire have done, is a good example of that. They don't label them the policies, and I mean the policies are radical, and radical policies are popular elsewhere. But you don't need to put the tin or a label of socialism on it if that's going to scare people off. The main thing is that the policies that are delivered are socialist radical policies. And then you've got councillors in the south of the country, in Worthing, I think, where we've got places that have always been Tory, and we've got good socialist Labour activists who have turned it around and are winning seats back. So these are good examples of socialists in opposition, actually promoting socialist policies and then bringing them into leadership as well.
Thanks, Mish. And Mark?
So on the direct question, what is the one thing I think Labour could announce that would be of critical value to the unions? And that would be to scrap all the anti-trade union legislation, not just the recent one, but going right back to Margaret Thatcher's anti-trade union reforms, because it recognises that unions are not about other people doing it for you. They are about doing it for yourselves. And the laws we currently have at the moment means that it is harder and harder and harder for working people to fight back against unscrupulous bosses. So it would be the complete repeal of all the anti-union laws, including the right to take secondary and solidarity strike action with other groups of workers who don't always have the industrial muscle to win for themselves. That would be the single most important thing, I think, that could be done to free up our unions. In terms of just some of the other questions, Gemma, and thank you for chairing this session, which I think has been really enjoyable. The way I look at it, I'm in the Labour Party. I've been expelled once. I was expelled in 1990. Then when Jeremy was leader, myself and Matt Rack, they tried to stop us rejoining, and I'm in the Labour Party now. But I think the moment being in the Labour Party acts as a barrier on anyone doing what is right, supporting struggle, working with others and fighting back, then the Labour Party is the wrong place to be. And it's not that at the moment, but it is getting perilously close for some people. When people can be expelled or suspended for writing an article, appearing on a platform, or ludicrously, and can I say solidarity to Crispin Flintoff, somebody who's worked tirelessly for the left over many, many years, suspended for circulating a resignation letter from a former CLP officer, it becomes so utterly difficult for people to operate that if you try and act within the rules and it stops you showing solidarity and fighting back, then frankly, I think it is better for people to do the right thing and face the consequences, because that is the way to fight back. It is not playing by their rules, it is playing by our socialist values and using that to fight back. And the truth is, the single best way to force the Labour Party leftwards is if struggle emerges, whether it is over universal credit, justice for migrants, equality, the cost of living crisis. It is when those struggles are being fought and won, the Labour Party will be forced to move to the left. And that would be my view. I think it is also about us accepting as a left that often we're very good at talking to each other. Sometimes we're not very good at talking to each other, by the way, but we can be very good at talking to each other, but we have to start talking to working class people, and we have to root our struggles in those working class communities, many of whom elected Tory MPs in the last election. And that is not done by saying we're business friendly. And it is not done by saying it's anti-Semitic for people who are pro-Palestine to demonstrate against the Israeli ambassador. And it is not done by denouncing strikes. The way you engage with working class communities is to be on their side. And that is to be on their side when they're struggling to make ends meet because universal credit has been cut, to be on their side because workers are fighting back, including those fighting back against Labour councils, and to be on the side of migrants and not Union Jack waving in order to try and appeal to the right-wing press. Our values are the way that we not only inspire ourselves to fight the struggles, but they are also ultimately by winning those struggles and waging them, I think, can we move the Labour leadership back in the right direction. And so, you know, for me, and I'll finish on this, it means we know what those struggles are now. It means that we know that we all should be off this call and asking ourselves what's happening in our village, town or city. What picket line can I join? How can I help support refugees, support people in the food bank movement, fighting for those people sometimes without a voice? How can we start making sure small struggles become larger ones? And how can we start turning the tide against what is one of the worst governments that any of us have had the misfortune to actually live under? And if we get all of that right, we can get a far better Britain and play our part in making it a much better world. And I would say, therefore, to the person who said sum up socialism in a word, it's very hard to use one word, but I'll use this word, joy. It is about joy and equality and happiness and the eradication of all the evils that capitalism inflicts on people every single day. And if we want more joy and more happiness and more fairness, we should fight for it now, and we should break the rules if the rules need broken, because we need to be on the right side.
Wonderful, thank you, Mark. And I think to be sharing the joy and the hope we all felt in past years, and that was our fight for a better world, wasn't it? Richard.
Thanks very much, Gemma, and thanks, Evan, for those questions. Obviously, I can't answer them all, so I jotted down a few which I thought maybe applied to me as Secretary of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs and obviously a left Labour MP. I think the question that was asked was not to try and define socialism in one sentence, which is pretty hard, but I think the question was, in one sentence, where should socialists be? And my answer to that is, socialists should be in every single struggle in the way that Mark has just described, because struggles take place, yes, in Parliament, but also on the protest and on the picket line and in the community as well. And we see that the government is trying to prevent working class people from fighting back against their unjust and unpopular policies. That's why there's the anti-trade union laws, to try and stop people struggling through their trade unions. That's why there's the attempts at voter suppression with voter ID, to attempt to stop people fighting back at the ballot box. And that's why we now see the Tories pushing through with these draconian anti-protest laws in an attempt to block people fighting back through protest. Whatever laws are passed, we need to carry on fighting back through the protest, through the industrial action, and of course in Parliament as well, and in our community. So socialists should be involved in each and every struggle for a better and more equal world. And that brings me on to the question that's been asked by a number of people about the role of the Labour Party. Now, I don't have a romantic view of the Labour Party. I don't think that the Labour Party has always been a socialist party throughout its history, and suddenly there's an aberration come along whereby we've got a leadership which isn't pursuing the socialist policies that we would like. I think we need to recognise the Labour Party as the imperfect creation of the working class in this country, a bit like many of our trade unions. And so I'll use a parallel. Let's imagine if the right-wing candidate for the leader of Unite, Gerard Coyne, had been elected as General Secretary of Unite. Would it have been sensible for comrades to say, well, our candidate didn't win the General Secretary election, so tomorrow let's set up our own trade union. There's 12 people in it to start with, and I'm sure that we'll have 2 million in a year or so. I don't think that would have been a sensible approach, and I'm sure that comrades in Unite, if Gerard Coyne as a right-wing candidate had won that election, would have instead decided to campaign for progressive policies and to ensure that by the time there was another election for General Secretary of that union, there would be in a position where the left candidates would win that General Secretary election. So the trade unions, the Labour Party, I think are imperfect creations of the working class in our country, because most things created through struggle are imperfect. And the Labour Party and our trade unions are contested spaces. that there's a contest of ideas, a contest of organisation. So I don't think we should walk away from that. The other week I spoke at Halifax Friends of Palestine, and the chair of the meeting concluded with a remark which really struck a chord with me. She said and she was alluding to the struggles of the left in Britain, and she said that if people in Palestine don't give up, given all the oppression that they face, how can the British left justify giving up in the circumstances which we face in our society, fighting for a better economy, fighting for a more equal society? And I think that's right. I think as leftists in our society, although I understand how hard it is, we don't have to face the oppression that comrades in many other countries in Latin America or anywhere else face. The point was made about climate catastrophe. And of course, climate catastrophe is the biggest failure of free market capitalism. The pursuit of profit before people and planet has brought our globe and our species, as well as many other species, our species to the brink of potential destruction. Now, I don't advise anybody who's on the left to only struggle within the Labour Party. I think, as I say, that socialists should be in every single struggle. And I think that the role of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs, and I'm proud to be the secretary, is as Tony Benn envisaged it when he founded it in the early 80s. It was meant to be that link between the left in Parliament and the social movement and trade union and liberation struggles outside Parliament in wider society. So we can't be myopically focused just on what happens in Parliament, but neither should we relegate what happens in Parliament to as if it's some kind of inconsequential afterthought. As the left, we need to have our target state power, a left-led Labour government running one of the most important economies in the world with a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. That has to be our goal. But at the same time, we have to be involved in all struggles, the struggles against discrimination, the struggle for migrant rights, the struggle for women's rights, the struggle against transphobia, the struggle to avert climate catastrophe. So I think we should be involved in all of these things. And so that's my reflections on this. Somebody asked how, and this is my last thing, how many Labour MPs support trade unions in struggle? Not enough. Quite a few, but not enough, because until every single elected Labour representative supports every single trade union strike, then the answer is always not enough. But it's our job as a movement to increase support for our trade union sisters and brothers in struggle.
Thanks, Richard. And thank you for everyone for your incredible contributions, and to everyone participating with your questions. We've had over 1,500 people join the last couple of sessions, which is incredible over all platforms. And we know that we have really important battles ahead, but we also know just how important our campaign against the Tories' divisive agenda is. It's from including into Black Lives Matter from a rallying cry into reality, for arguing for an economic alternative. These fights just go hand in hand with our fight for democracy and members' rights within the Labour Party. And additionally, as this discussion and others today have shown, there is so much important work to be done in Labour, in trade unions, in our communities, through movements such as the People's Assembly. So we've got to build the resistance to the Tories and popularise socialist solutions to these crises that we face. So please also take on board the action links that have been posted in the chat. Please also donate so that Labour Assembly Against Austerity can continue to do the amazing work that they do and continue hosting these important events. And please stay online. The next session is due to start very, very soon, and it's almost imminently, and it's with John Trickett and Kat Hobbs. They're going to be in conversation about public ownership in the 21st century. So thank you so much again for joining, and see you soon.